Welcome, everybody, to our video game state of the market discussion. I'm Robert Wolonsky, the communications director here at Heritage Auctions. It's been a long week. I think that's what I do here. We'll have to check when I get back from this video discussion. I am joined to my left by Valarie McLeckie, the managing director of our video games department. And to her left, Sam Spiegel, who is technically the director of international numismatics. We just did a World and Ancient Coin discussion a few weeks ago.
Yeah, I'm based in the World and Ancient Coin department. I run that category for Heritage, but in recent years, my role has evolved and I work with other categories now, most notably video games.
Well, when you think of World and Ancient Coins, you immediately think of video games. So they do go hand in hand.
Yeah,
Very
exactly.
similar.
So I appreciate you all being here, and I appreciate everybody watching, whether it's live or whether it's on YouTube later. But certainly if you have a question, which is the reason we do these live, so you can ask Valarie and Sam questions, because you don't often get the chance to do that live. Feel free to drop a question in, or if you want to do it anonymously, email it to tommyn@ha.com. Tommy is directing this, and Tommy will tell us what you want to know. But I have a lot of questions first. You guys have a lot of things you wanted to discuss. We haven't done one of these in about a year. Mm-hmm. A lot has changed in that year. But I do want to back up just a little bit, in as much as that many of my friends still ask me, how did this even become a category? And this is a relatively new category, right? For this is about 3 years old.
Yeah, that's about right. I mean, we've been auctioning games since, oh gosh, it's been a while. February 2019.
So 3 years.
Yeah, so three years. But our most notable earliest auction was probably the November 2019 Carolina collection auction.
What made that notable? That's before I got here.
Right. So that was the first auction that we had where we had been able to offer a critical mass of really impressive high-end sealed video games. I mean, of course, we'd had, some nice titles here and there in comic auctions until then. And that was technically part of a comic auction, but it was the first time that we did a standalone catalog for the video games too.
And standalone session for
right.
The whole Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, that was a significant catalyst to propelling us to where we are now.
It's interesting. A lot of my friends who are not in the auction business are often, they're fascinated by how video games became something incredibly collectible and incredibly valuable. I assume that is that still something that you have to explain to people from time to time?
Yeah.
Or has it become sort of has it become an accepted thing over that 3 years?
No, I would say, I mean, especially when I'm talking with people who aren't necessarily collectors, or they don't really stay up to date with what's going on in the collectibles industry. When I tell them what I do for work, they're like, oh, so what game do you design? And I'm like, that's not really what I do. And I usually just kind of leave it alone from there and try to explain it best I can. But yeah, no, it still requires a little bit of explanation from time to time.
Oh, so how do you describe it to them? Because I tell my friends there's a nostalgia factor. Certainly, for our generation, it's not necessarily Michelangelo and Picasso. It's Super Mario Brothers and Legend of Zelda. Those are the things that we love. We played, and to be able to find them in these conditions at this later date is certainly a significant sort of totem for many of them.
Right. I usually explain that people have been collecting video games for many, many years, but we work in the end of the market where things are becoming a formalized collectibles market for this specific collectible, much in the same way, comics and trading cards and coins have evolved throughout the years.
Sure. When I was a kid, we didn't slab our baseball cards. We just put them in I didn't put them in our bicycle spokes. I'm not that old, but we just had them in tackle boxes and traded them with our friends.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I do want to talk about the changes over the last year, because when I got here, it was basically just you. I got here 2 years ago. In fact, my first day at Heritage, we grabbed a video camera and went there and talked to you about something you had interesting sitting on your desk, an original video game system, as a matter of fact.
Yeah, I remember that. It was the Game & Watch kiosk.
That's right. So it wasn't just video games. The category is certainly bigger than that. It is about systems themselves and rare platforms and consoles. But it was interesting to me because it was just you. You were sitting in the comic book department where you sit today. But video games were sort of part of comic book signature auctions, and that certainly hasn't been the case today, to the point where there are multiple comic book auctions happening sort of at any given moment. I mean, multiple video game auctions happening at any given moment. How surprised are you by how it evolved, and how did it evolve?
So I think that answer is twofold. I'm not surprised that it's evolved to the degree that it has, but I am surprised about the timeline. I didn't expect the category to take off quite as quickly as it did. But I would say that, the pandemic was a bit of an accelerant. So were, various other things going on in the world when, video games sort of came to the forefront at formalizing the collectible.
Yeah, but even before that, if you back up, even, the powers that be at Heritage didn't expect it to progress as quickly as it did, because when Valarie started in December 2018, I guess it was, she just came on part-time, right? They didn't think video games could warrant a full-time employee even. And then quickly, within 6 months, she came on full-time. And then now we have a full staff of, specialists in operations.
Yeah, I got to the point where I was pretty much working full-time here and full-time somewhere else. And I had to say, hey, can I just switch to full-time here officially? Because it's already happening. So, just kind of progressed from there, I guess.
Well, it's interesting because there has been a growth in the category in terms of the specialists who've been hired, who've been brought on, and I believe you're actually still looking for people, right?
Yeah. So within, I want to say it's been less than 8 months. Do you think that's a fair
last summer is when you really started?
Well, the first standalone signature was in July of last year, correct?
Right. And then not long after that, we hired our first additional specialist, Evan Massengill. And then not long after that, we had Brett Weiss come aboard. And we now have 2 dedicated ops team members, and we're looking for 2 more people for ops. And, I'd love to see 2 more video game specialists come in, but it's surprisingly challenging to find a video game specialist.
Well, what do you look for in a video game specialist? It's not just about how well you can play Super Mario Brothers.
Right.
Although that would be a kick-ass job.
I mean, I would love to just be able to play video games all day, but no, it does take a lot more than that. Video game specialist, I guess it does have kind of a catch-all meaning because but Evan and Brett both have the same job title, but their responsibilities that they take on are a little different from each other. They play to their strengths. But right now we're really looking for somebody who's like, a team player, who's willing to write descriptions, speak with clients, who knows the material or can learn it quickly. So, I mean, that I guess it doesn't really sound like a tall order when you say it out loud, but I mean, easier said than done,
Right.
Yeah.
Well, when you're talking about knowing the material, it's interesting, right? Because you're talking about it seems like a narrow thing, but it's a very broad spectrum because you are talking about multiple platforms. You're talking about different iterations of games. I would never have known what made a hang tab so special when I never would have thought that was a thing that would enter my vocabulary 2 years ago. And yet here we are.
I hear you.
So, I mean, talk in terms of what you've learned over the last 2-3 years in terms of this becoming a significant part of what we do here and what certainly a significant part of your life.
So are you asking what I've learned about video games in general?
Yeah, about the games, about, certainly you think look, I think I know a great deal about a certain subject,
Sure.
But you're learning every day. I assume that there are things about this category that have surprised you over the last couple of years.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I feel like there's not a day that goes by still that I don't learn something that I didn't know the day before. If I were to just sit down and try to explain everything that I've learned over the past 3 years, I mean, we'd need a lot longer than an hour for that. But I mean, there's just a lot of minutia that goes into learning the variants of video games and the different relationships the publishers had between each other. I mean, it's just, I could go on and on, really.
Yeah, and what's interesting about that, in that it is a very new category for Heritage, it's also a very new market in general.
Right.
And so the market itself is still evolving and figuring out what, say, variants it recognizes as important and what variants it recognizes as not important.
Right.
You mentioned the hang tab. That's a very important variant that people will pay a big premium for. But if you're looking at zip codes or something like that, whether it's the 5-digit or 9-digit zip code, some people might care about that. A lot of people don't. And the market is still figuring out what it recognizes as an important variant and what it, doesn't really matter as much.
Right. And another thing that makes it so challenging is that there are very few online written resources that are verifiable. So finding this information out, I mean, you pretty much have to know someone that knows someone a lot of times.
Yeah. And that's one of the great things I think about, the heritage archives in our descriptions, and something that goes into them, the philosophy that goes behind the descriptions, is that it's not just sort of a tool to sell the material. It's also a research tool, right? This is a way to help educate the market. Even, after the item has sold, people can go to the archives and understand, what is a hang tab. They can read the descriptions and understand it and learn themselves.
Well, I mean, it's interesting. Certainly sports, it's one thing to discuss coins, sports. You certainly have a baseline of understanding. This was used in a particular game by a particular player during a particular moment. It's a milestone piece. In video games, I assume in some ways a little bit harder, to discuss, to detail, and to share that information. So how does that process take place? Thank you. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry,
I'm being handed a note.
That totally distracted me. Could you repeat the question?
Well, we talked about, and I know we're going to get into this a little bit because you do want to discuss population reports. That's been something that's been a significant part of it as well. So we've talked a lot about, sports. That glove is from this game. That bat was used in this game. This card is from that particular manufacturer. It's the best of based on PSAs, blah, blah, blah. There are census reports because they have been around a long time. Mm-hmm. For yours, what's the most difficult part of sort of explaining to folks what makes a thing? When you talk about hang tabs, for instance, that was a thing that I had to really sort of understand and get my head around. I assume that you're creating a vocabulary for a category that's relatively new for collectors who are trying to get their heads around this market as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely been a category, a vocabulary that's pre-existed our existence in the market. But it's just a matter of making sure that we are using, the most popularized terms for collectors in the proper way. And as far as, explaining significance goes, I mean, that's something that we've had to, educate ourselves over, when we are not familiar with something, just so we can, properly explain it to people. I mean, there's a lot of first appearances and starts of franchises that we offer as well. And that's a lot of what makes a game significant too, is, what did this introduce to the playing community? And those things seem to be really, driving demand for video games.
Sure.
The rare variants, the important titles.
And it'll evolve in time, and new vocabulary will still be introduced, even in the category I started with, World and Ancient Coins, which has been a collectible for 500 years or more. There's still new terminology that's being introduced, or the market is putting new emphasis over time on different aspects of a coin, and some things that used to be acceptable in the market are no longer acceptable. Different kinds of conservation that's, kosher or not kosher. It evolves in time, and we're just seeing that, as Valarie was saying earlier, at an accelerated pace with video games. It progressed much more quickly than anyone really expected.
So to that point, certainly we have added a number of sales. It used to just be a handful of signatures or in the comic book auctions. Certainly that has grown significantly over the last few months. Talk about the decision to do that and what impact that has had on the market.
To separate out from comics. So the decision was made primarily out of necessity, because we felt that video games, of course, needed to be, standing on its own, for one. Two, it seemed to be difficult for people to kind of plan their schedules around some of the nuances as far as like the timing goes for the sessions, because when you're waiting on one session to start, like, let's say, for example, so when we first started out, we did put some video games in the platinum session of comics, which is, relegated to $10,000 and higher lots. And the video games that we would place there definitely fit that category. And at the time, there were very few video games that
I think there were 2 the first time.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. The Kid Icarus, and I think, what was the other one?
There was a Donkey Kong, I think.
That's right, a hang tab Donkey Kong 3. And I remember it was difficult for people to tune in at the very end of the Platinum session to catch a glimpse of these 2 lots,
Right.
And then have to wait hours to see the rest of the floor session for video games. And then with our first big sale, wasn't it the 9.4 hang tab Super Mario Brothers in April?
That
No,
might.
January? That sounds right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's right. that when it sold for 6 figures, that's what kind of made everyone say, well, guess it's probably time to, shift off.
April 2021, the 9.6A Plus hang tab Super Mario Brothers, it sold for 660. Yeah,
Yeah.
right, yeah. And then the next one in July,
That's
the
right.
first standalone signature auction. And so, I mean, from a value perspective, it just made sense to spin it off, and we're continuing to do that and adding more venues, which we'll hopefully get a chance to talk more about later. But in 2019, we sold, I think, maybe $3 million worth of video games throughout the course of the year. In 2020, it was maybe 8 million. And 2021, it was over 26 million worth of video games last year at auction. So it just keeps growing, and at a certain point, you just have to decide that, all right, this is going to stand on its own.
Yeah,
Well,
just gotta open the gate.
But there was also that point, right, where video games were seldom selling for significant figures,
Right.
the 6 figures. That certainly has changed radically over the last year, especially, has it not?
Yeah, and it's a bit unexpected how quickly it happened.
Yeah.
That Super Mario 64 sale, I think, it certainly helped foster that sort of idea that video games could sell for really impressive sums. Though I do think that we're probably going to see. It'll probably take a long time before we see another result quite as high as the Super Mario 64. So I don't know. Maybe that was a bad example.
Well, I do want to talk about how obviously, being this is a state of the market and people have questions and they're going to have questions. I do want to talk about sort of how the auctions themselves have changed, because certainly I think people tend to define a category by its highest price item, right? Certainly there are different categories or different auctions that take place at different price points too, right? So there are the signatures, there are the showcases, there are certainly other auctions, and you've sort of begun to divide them up by collections as well, by companies, by histories of. So how was that decision made?
So as far as the showcase auctions go, let me just pull up some
Sure.
notes, because there's a few things I wanted to be sure to touch on here.
Please.
So the reason that we decided to create that venue was, for several reasons, really. We had been, of course, receiving a lot of high-end material that would have been there would have been a lot of duplication in the signature auction if we had relegated it all to signature auctions. And we wanted to be sure that we had a venue where we could still highlight things to a greater degree than what we do for our auctions that we have week to week. And the themes that we've come up with have been a way to better market material that may otherwise fall through the cracks of other auction venues. So I guess just to give you an example, we have some really cool thematic sales coming up this year, like the 6th Generation and Beyond sale in May, the Pioneers of Home Video Games in June, and the Wide World of Sports in September. There's going to be a wide array of lots in those sales that I would say are a bit niche for those types of collectors, even because of their rarity and obscurity. And if we had put them into a signature auction, even though they're very rare, sometimes those things have a tendency to get overlooked. And with a weekly auction, it doesn't afford us enough time to really explain to collectors why this is a lot that they should be paying attention to. So the showcase auction provides this really nice middle ground where you can have a very focused theme that appeals to collectors of that theme, so they can, tune in and look for the things that they seldom see.
See, I'm fascinated by that because now you're talking about the niche. The collectors are sort of collecting by category, by brand, by genre, by sports, by whatever they grew up playing and loved the most. I am curious about the changing nature of the collector that you've seen over the last couple of years as well.
Like just the overall demographics.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. So it's kind of hard to pin down in such simple terms. Just the overall demographics of, your typical collector. I would say they're generally in their middle age years, 40s, 50s.
They're old men like me. You can say it.
They're younger than coin collectors, that's for sure.
There you go.
But yet, even coin collectors have become much younger these days. We've seen this recently, certainly.
Yeah.
I mean, to take a sort of step back from the pure demographics of it, I think what we've seen most in the market changing over the last couple of years is a shift in emphasis on what the high-end collectors are looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, one of the grails of NES collectors for years was stadium events, right?
Yeah.
And we've sold a sealed stadium events, but that's now just a fraction of what a high grade black box Super Mario is going to sell for, or a Sonic or something like that. I guess that's Sega, but I think the market is shifting in that it's looking for these marquee blue chip titles that are these iconic characters, the starts of franchises, as Valarie was saying, and not so much looking for these kind of obscure titles that still have a following and still sell for strong prices, but it's not going to get the same sort of premium. It hasn't seen the same sort of appreciation as these other more pop culture oriented titles.
Well, it's interesting. So we have a question that sort of gets to kind of what I'm talking about, in as much as that I'm talking about the community. Because I know you guys talk about, in sports, it's talked about the hobby. There's a collector, but in video games, there's a real community that has been created up around this. And somebody asked, how do you see the community of collectors and how willing are they to share information and knowledge? And is there somewhere online, like Discord or Clubhouse, where collectors gather to chat and watch auctions? I know the answer to that, but I'd like for you to.
Okay, so I will say the community as a whole has been terrific. Everyone's always really willing to share their knowledge, and I think it's because they, like us, we just really love talking about this category, and talking about the different pieces within it that make it special. I would say that there's definitely a lot of places that you could go online to interact with people in this community and become a bigger part of it. There's a few different Discord channels that you could join. I know that there are some Facebook groups that are oriented for video game collectors at this end of the market. What other resources?
Clubhouse, which you mentioned earlier.
Right.
How could I forget that?
Yeah. What's really interesting to me is a shift or a difference in this category than I've seen with other categories. And it speaks to something that we've been talking about internally over the last couple of years, which is looking at our auctions not just as a sales tool, but a form of entertainment. Mm-hmm. And so there's multiple YouTubers who will live stream even the Tuesday night auctions in addition to the signature auctions. And they'll get thousands of viewers just watching along, looking at the auctions as not just a way for them to buy, because most of the people watching aren't going to be buyers, but to learn about the market and see what's going on. So, similarly, if you're really into sports, you might be, you'll watch the Super Bowl. If you're really into video games, the Heritage Signature Auction is sort of like the Super Bowl of video game collecting, if I can make that analogy.
You can. I'm not sure you should.
I'm very
but you
flattered that
can.
you would make that analogy. But yeah, it's a tall order. Just to kind of piggyback off of what Sam was saying, we're really hyper cognizant of things like session length and the impact that it has on bidder fatigue, et cetera. And I'd say that maybe more so than some other categories that exist, just because we recognize the vast majority of our bidders like to watch the auction from start to finish.
Right.
I know of a few different Clubhouse channels where people will meet up just to sit there and provide their own commentary on what lot is on the auction block at the moment. And that's always a nice supplement to making the auctions more fun and more of a social experience than just watching on your own.
Do you pop in and listen and engage?
Oh yeah, I do.
Is that fun for you? Do you? It is.
It is fun for me, to be honest. I usually do it while I'm cooking dinner because it's at 8:00. But yeah, it's a nice way to make sure that you get that interaction time with the community, each week or whenever the auction is going on, and it's become a really valuable tool for me just to see what people's overall thoughts are on our auctions and how we can improve them. I don't anticipate we'll make too many changes to, our signature auction or Tuesday auctions too much this year, but the showcase auctions are probably what we're going to expand on the most. At this point, we've realized that there's a bit of a sweet spot with number of lots for a signature auction, right around 350 total between the floor and the internet session. And with weeklies, those are likely going to increase. And Robert, there's something I didn't include in my notes to you because I just got it approved after we turned in our notes.
I'm very excited to hear this. I have no idea what you're going to say.
Take a moment to just announce that we're actually rebranding the auctions that we have every week.
Tuesday night auctions.
Yeah, the Tuesday night auctions. That's not their name anymore. They are the Tuesday mini boss auctions. So the reason I chose this name.
That's shocking. I didn't even know how to react to that.
Are you familiar with the term mini boss?
Sure.
Sure?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, I am. I'm a human. I know. I interact with people and culture. Yes.
No. Well, when I first pitched the idea, I was met with "What's that?" So I didn't know.
Well, yes, I have played video games in my life. But thanks for asking.
I mean, I didn't mean anything by it.
I know I look like a 100-year-old man. I appreciate that. But I am fascinated. But what fascinates me about all of this, we just talk about the community here, right? Because it is such a new category in so many ways, that there is this creation of this community around it that most categories don't have. You're very tickled by all this. But I want to talk about that creation of the community and your part in it. Because it is such a new, because it is, as we said a moment ago, creating a vocabulary and creating an understanding of an appreciation for the category and that community. What kind of sort of misconceptions are there about this, and sort of what role do you see yourselves as having in terms of that discussion, leading it, taking the cue from that discussion? Because you say, we want to make auctions a little shorter. We don't want to get bidder fatigue. We want to put things in a better and more refined categories and auctions so people can better participate. That is certainly a reaction to that discussion that takes place within the community, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, as far as how I view my own role within the community, that's kind of a tough question. But off the cuff, I suppose I would say, like a friend and really more of I don't know, I try to be a guide as well as I can. Whenever somebody asks me a question or comes to me with needing advice, I usually try to think about how I would handle the situation if I were in their position, and what advice I would want somebody to give to me. That's what I try to give to everyone that I speak with. So really, I'm just here to help people meet their collecting goals and do what I can to, make that happen.
Right. I want to get to the Tuesday night auctions, or now the Tuesday mini bosses. I think that's a great segue because certainly, WADA is now part of Collectors Universe. So we've actually, and many people, in fact, the reason Tommy came in here is because he said there are many questions about VGA and CGC. That's what this note says.
Of course, yeah, that makes sense.
So let's get to that and what change that has made for you and for the category.
Okay, let's get down to it.
Let's get down to it.
Okay, so just to kind of give a very, very high level overview of what's going on with all the different grading services. So WADA's Denver office is closing, of course, because they're moving everything to Collectors Universe headquarters in California. So that has effectively uncorked their bottleneck. We've received probably around 1,000 games within the past week. And I suspect we'll receive many more in the next couple of weeks. So I fully anticipate the Tuesday auctions, the Tuesday mini boss auctions, they will probably almost double in size here as soon as we can get our operations team up to speed with, basically where they are in the scheduling process.
Right. Yeah, we need to scale up because receiving 3,000 WATA graded games in the course of a month or so
is easier said than done. Yeah, I mean, especially when you consider the dimensions, the fact that we have 2 ops staff at this time, we need to add 2 more. There's a lot of challenges that go into it. Not to mention our signature auction deadline is next Wednesday on the 2nd. So there's a lot of moving parts right now as far as WATA is concerned. That aside, as far as VGA goes, that is a decision that we probably could have made a bit sooner, I would say. I know that there are some concerns within the community about the difference in scale and everything like that.
What do you mean by that?
So VGA's grading scale is a little bit of a different animal than WATA's. Let me just make sure that I pull up my notes here so I don't miss anything that I wanted to discuss.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because in sports cards, you have Beckett, you have PSA, you have any number of sort of companies that have come into the grading. Is it any different in that regard? Because certainly there are different grading companies for similar categories.
Yeah, obviously the biggest difference between WATA and VGA is that WATA breaks apart the box and the seal grade, and VGA just has one composite grade for everything.
Right, and there are definitely pros and cons to each. With VGA's scale, there are fewer grades between an 80 and a 95 plus, and from that perspective, it sounds like it should be something that's easier to teach, but since the grade is composite between the box and the seal, it's very difficult to explain to someone why something is an 80 and not an 85. Not to mention, their website doesn't necessarily go into explicit detail, all the fine things that inform them as to whether or not they choose an 80 over an 85 and so on. But with WATA, there are a remarkably large number of permutations that occur between an 8.5 and a 9.8 because of the fact that they separate the box and the seal grade in the way that they do. And Sam, we looked at that last night, and how many different permutations were there?
If you look at, say, a WATA 8.0 on their scale, an 8.0 to a 9.8, considering the box and the seal grade, there's 49 different grades possible.
Yeah.
Whereas the equivalent grade on the VGA scale is about an 80 plus or minus. Between an 80 and a 95 plus, there are 8 grades. So, I mean, you're looking at one scale that maybe has too many grades and one scale that has maybe too few grades. It's kind of hard to, do a one-to-one comparison between the two. And I'm not saying either scale is wrong or either scale is perfect,
right.
But they're just sort of two different ways that people can look at it.
Right. And to that end, what we really wanted to do by offering VGA in our venue was to allow the market to decide, what scale makes the most sense to them. I certainly have my own personal feelings about what scale I think is easier to understand, and somebody else may feel differently, and that's okay.
Do you share yours publicly? Because I'm sure people would like to know.
I do, generally when asked. So since you asked.
I'm sure people want to know. I mean, here's a question from Alan. Alan wants to know, when are we going to start auctioning off VGA video games? So clearly there's a very big interest in.
Great question, Alan. So it's going to be in the April signature auction. So right around the corner. After that, expect to see, VGA games offered in the Tuesday mini boss auctions and in the signature auctions, showcase auctions. But we wanted to be sure that we started with a bang as far as the VGA introduction goes, because we wanted to be sure that we gave that grading service a fair chance to perform well in our venue. And we felt that the signature auction would be, hands down the best way to ensure that that happens. The thing that really excites me though about being able to offer VGA is it allows us to offer things that we haven't been able to offer in graded format before, like sealed consoles, accessories, different peripherals, big box collector's editions, that sort of thing. So it's really opened the door as far as, the type of material that we can offer. So that's what we love most about having
Right.
the VGA games in our venue.
But as the counsel for this community in some way, I mean, when people do ask you, all right, I have collected WATA for this amount of time now that VGA is coming in, how do I collect that and how do I gauge that against this other piece that I've had graded by these myriad data points as opposed to the far fewer that are upcoming?
Gotcha. So I would say, if this is somebody who is looking to buy something for their collection, I'm assuming that's the scenario the hypothetical scenario we're in.
Sure.
Sure. Okay. Well, I would say buy the game, not the grade. And that's I think that's the advice that most people would give in any other collectibles.
Well, the advice is always buy the thing you love. So
right. Yeah. So I mean, look at the actual piece that you are going to be buying and ask yourself, are you happy with the condition that it's in? Grade aside, do you like the way that it looks?
Right.
Right. As far as, just translating between the different grading services goes, that's a question that's a little harder to answer because I've personally crossed over, VGA 80s that have, gotten 9.2s, and I've also crossed them and they've gotten 7.5s. So, I mean, it kind of runs the gamut because WATA and VGA do look at games in a slightly different way. Best advice really is to look at the game itself.
Yeah. And I guess the other way to answer that question is to wait and see how the market responds. Once we start offering VGA, I think things are going to take shape on, I would assume that there's going to be certain sectors of the market that prefer WATA over VGA and certain sectors that prefer VGA over WATA.
Mm-hmm.
And then, once we have some data points that we can look to, then we can make more informed decisions when advising clients on what they should do when it comes time to sell or what they're looking for when they're, trying to buy.
What will you look for? What will be some of those key points for you?
Well, the responsibility we have is to get the most money for the consigners,
sure.
Right? And so if it makes sense to cross, say, a VGA 85 plus to a WATA holder, if we think, based on WATA scale and what they look at, it's going to cross very high, then that'd be the recommendation. If we think it's not going to grade particularly high on the WATA scale, based on, again, what WATA prioritizes when they're coming up with the grade, then the suggestion would probably be to leave it in the VGA holder.
Right. I mean, we essentially want to mitigate as much risk for, for net loss as possible when our clients sell. Like, we just want to be sure that they get the most money for their games. And if that means leaving it as it is, great. If that means crossing it into a different holder, so be it. But it's really a very individualistic decision.
Right. As an aside, David Hoffman asks here, will signature auctions become boss battle? And if they do, I believe you owe David some money.
Well, I think he's picking up on the nuances of why I picked Mini Boss to describe the weeklies. Because, since we have been seeing a lot more high-end material come to the market in recent months in, high grade,
right.
The quality of lots that we have been offering week to week has increased because, I can't remember the exact timeline. I think it was all of 2021. We offered like 14 copies of Super Mario Brothers. No, what was the?
No. In the last 3 months, we have offered 14 sealed copies of Super Mario Brothers.
There you go. Yeah, so he was helping me with my stats. But yeah, within the last 3 months, we've offered 14 sealed copies of Super Mario Brothers. If we had waited to put all of those in a signature auction, that would have undoubtedly made the price, much softer on each of those, and it would have been harder to watch.
Right.
It would have been boring to watch. I can't imagine too many people want to sit there and watch the same game get closed 14 times in a row. So, you know, these Tuesday auctions truly do have, you know, centerpiece level lots for certain collectors. And I wanted to recognize that by giving it an appropriate name.
Right. You know, CGC is also in this now, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how does that add to the element of suspense in the grading services?
It's just exciting times all around. Yeah, I mean, you know, we're really excited about CGC's entry into this market. I think that they're going to introduce a really wonderful product, and it's, you know, on the horizon. And that's just, you know, one more element that basically indicates that we're going to have to expand our offerings. So, you know, the showcase auctions were a great way to do that. And the Tuesday auctions are going to get a little bit bigger.
Do you know how they're going to grade CGC?
So I do not have any information on that at this time, but from what I've heard through the grapevine, it sounds incredibly promising. And I think the market's going to be really happy with what they have to offer.
Yeah, I think smart money is going to be on them following a similar grading scale as the comics do, right? You know, 9.8, 9.6, 9.4.
I would assume that they would stick to their very familiar pattern of grading.
Yeah, though for CGC trading cards, they have a slightly different scale than what they use for comic books.
Right. There are fewer grades on that scale. So I don't think that they're going to be following that that model.
Miguel Diaz has a question for you, which is a great reminder that you need to give your email address and a way to contact you, because Miguel says, are you interested in selling entire collections, not graded, but with a decent chunk of new and sealed games? If yes, and of course that's a yes, who should I contact? That would be Valarie.
Well, so best thing to do is to email videogames@ha.com and send photos and as much information as you can about the collection. We regularly help people who have raw collections that are not graded. We submit the games to the appropriate grading service that makes the most sense, just based on, you know, the title, the condition. Right. And we front the cost of the grading fees. That way, you know, collectors don't have to pay out of pocket. Makes things much easier because those fees can add up really quickly. And we just deduct those at cost from auction settlement. We don't mark them up or anything like that. So,
Tommy, thank you for Linda and Tommy, thank you for putting that there. Email photos to videogames@ha.com and ValarieM@ha.com, or any other questions they have for you.
There you go.
So I want to get back to I'm fascinated by, and this is something we've discussed kind of offline for the last year or so. Most categories here, certainly when it comes to cards, comics, coins, have their population reports, their census, their indices. Video games, being a relatively new, has not really had that to this point, but certainly that is something we're attempting to build. We're building out other video game, and as services, grading services get into that, I assume that's going to be a significant part, because that's a great concern amongst collectors. How special is this piece? What is it sold for? So talk about the efforts to do that.
Take it away, Sam.
So this is one of the things
He's our index guy.
I am helping with in the video game category.
He doesn't at all look like an index guy either.
I'm not a data scientist, but I have a lot of experience working on collectibles indexes. I was able to, you know, build the architecture for the World Coin Index, which is infinitely larger than it is for video games. And so basically what that means is not just getting a list of every game that's ever been created, right? Because that's easy. Those lists exist online. It's adding all the major variants, as I was saying earlier, the variants that the market recognizes so that we can properly index those values. And more importantly, mapping equivalencies between the WADA system to the CGC system to the VGA system. And what that means on the outside, without getting into the nitty-gritty details of how it is put together on the back end, what it means to users of our website is that we can show relevant previous prices right on the lot page, as well as population data when it becomes available. So that we're not there yet. There's only the NES population data that WADA's put out, but presumably there's going to be population data from these other services for all systems at some point in the future, and we want to be ready for that. so that if we have a WADA graded game up for sale, we can have the previous prices grid for our past results right there on the lot page, as well as both the WADA population report, the CGC population report, and the VGA pop report right on the lot page. And the reason for that is it goes back to something that applies to all categories at Heritage, which is this goal to provide the bidder as much information as possible right there in front of them so that they can make an informed and confident bidding decision. Right. That's the ultimate goal of building out an index, so we can give as much information to the bidders as possible so that they can feel confident with what they're bidding on.
Well, it's interesting part of it, right? Because when a new category comes along, it is a wild west for kind of a long time. People are trying to look up things and trying to understand things and get their arms and heads around things that don't necessarily have something, a data point that they can fix on, as opposed to comics, which certainly has that, whether it has a grading guide or whether it has other population reports and CGCs, sports cards have PSA, and so forth. Somebody says, oh, here's a good question for you. Why should I consign my video games at Heritage? What is it that you do better than the competition? Great question, Philip.
It's a great question. I mean, the index. That's definitely one of them.
Well, that is a big. That should not be undersold by any stretch, because that's a big thing that I've heard a lot of, which is that video games are that Wild West thing because people don't really know how to get a handle on this.
Right, and we have sort of a rudimentary index right now, which is how you can see the previous prices grid on a lot of the lot pages, and that's going to improve in time. And I can't speak to what the other auction houses and dealers are doing right now, but this is something that Heritage is devoting a lot of time and resources to, building a comprehensive and robust index to provide as much information to bidders as possible, because we feel that it leads them to bid higher on lots. If they know what they're doing, they feel confident about it, they'll bid stronger. And then I think that'll, the short answer to that question is that we get higher prices than pretty much any other house, just consistently across the board.
Yeah, I would say to that end, one of our biggest strengths also is that there's a lot of consistency, month to month. I mean, granted, you do have to kind of take those anomaly high results with a grain of salt. But if you kind of take those away and you just look at the results on a regular basis for a particular title, they're usually fairly consistent. There's a healthy growth, even if it has been fast. And we also have a really robust base of bidders that, some of which only bid with us, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, I mean, with us, you get better data, you get, a robust bidding pool that you wouldn't get anywhere else due to the size of our company.
Right.
Yeah. And the fact that Heritage has been doing video games the longest of any other house, I think, speaks to sort of our position in the market, which is we have it down to like a science, right? We get the material, it'll be entered in approximately 6 weeks. If it's going in a Tuesday auction, it'll get in the next signature or showcase auction if it's going to that venue. You can see the full schedule for the next 6 or 9 months on the website right now. And so, when you think about it, Heritage has sold video games in close to 200 auctions at this point, right? Since we started in 2019. Like, we have a lot of experience with this. So Heritage knows what it's doing when it comes to this.
Well, to that point, talk a little bit about the placement of lots then, because certainly that is a significant piece. If you're a consignor, you don't want your piece to get buried in the wrong place, the wrong auction. So certainly there has to be a conscientiousness about how to put a piece in a particular sale.
Yes, there are. I wish it were, first, what I want clients to understand is, first and foremost, our interests are always going to be aligned with theirs. We want to place items where they're going to sell for the most money. We're on the same team. We both benefit when something sells for a strong price. So, of course, we want to be sure to do that for everyone that we work with. That aside, there are a lot of factors that go into placement, and that sort of makes explaining it a difficult task. But to oversimplify, we can only promise signature auction placement on $10,000 plus lots. And that's a guideline that we've had to build out of necessity, just because there are a lot of games in the $4,000 to $10,000 range, and sometimes even the $10,000 and up games can perform just as well or better in the Tuesday auctions. So there's still a little bit of wiggle room even within that guideline. That aside, $4,000 minimum for floor, $1,500 for the internet session, and our showcase minimum lot value is $500. I would say that one's a little squishy, since some of the rare niche titles that could be seen in those auctions are a little bit harder to gauge on the market potential. But all that aside, that really is sort of a gross oversimplification. I mean, if you look at it this way, there's a number of titles that we receive numerous copies of in similar grades on a regular basis, like Super Mario Brothers 1, 2, and 3, Pokemon Red, Yellow, Blue. The list goes on, and it's probably going to fluctuate a bit as the market develops further, because I can't imagine that we'll see sealed Super Mario Brothers 1s at the frequency that we do right now 10 years from now. I mean, that having been said, I wouldn't mind if that were the case. I don't think anybody would. But just realistically, these are sort of the guidelines we have to work within right now. So we'll have to alter our strategy in real time in many cases. But, just going back to the example that we had mentioned earlier, within, a 3-month period, we offered 14 sealed copies of Super Mario Brothers 1. And, many of those in high grade would qualify to signature floor for that $10,000 minimum. But there and again, I don't think many people want to see 14 copies in the same auction.
Somebody asks, and let's take a break from this, is there any future in Commodore 64 ZX Spectrum Apple games? Those are mostly tapes. Some were floppy disk. They don't, for the most part, seem that collectible, but do you think that market will change?
I mean, it's kind of hard to say. At this point, we haven't really offered too many sealed vintage PC games. So
has anybody brought them to you?
Well, we've had a few.
Yeah.
But we've always sold them raw, not in holders, and that sort of makes it difficult to gauge what the potential would be if we actually sold them in a third-party holder. But now that we can offer VGA, we'll probably know the answer to that very soon.
Yeah, I think now that we're offering VGA and we can take some of these PC box games that don't fit into a Watto holder, we're going to have a better idea of what the market thinks about them. And I think there's a lot of great titles on the Commodore 64, especially. It's a very early system. There's a lot of pop culture adjacent titles. There's something in our personal collection, early Tetris for the Commodore 64 that I love. It is not a particularly valuable game, but it's just a very early example that I think is great, and I think the market will come to appreciate it in time once there's more data available.
Yeah.
Here's a question. Have any of you spoken with some of the 6-figure buyers? I know you have. And if so, have they come over from other categories? And certainly we have seen a significant amount of cross-pollination between categories.
The answers are, sorry.
So that's one question. The last half of that was, what is that demographic like, those who cross?
So that's a really great question. The answer is yes and yes. And as far as which categories are crossing over into video games, I mean, it runs the gamut from sports to coins.
I assume
currency,
comics, given that's where they began.
Of course, yeah. Urban art. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's hard to just say it's one category in particular that's coming into this.
Urban art's an interesting one, because I assume that those boxes are, for some people, the art themselves. To have that graded box of that game, that sealed game, becomes your sort of piece of art that you put in your house.
Sure. I mean, there are some games that we've added to our collection because we just really liked the art. I mean, Uninvited, I just think the cover on that one is really cool. And so, when one came up and it was a condition I liked, I bought it. So
and specifically on urban art, you're seeing a lot of collaborations now between artists and these sort of pop culture companies, right? There was just a release earlier this week from the Pokemon store with Bear Bricks, where they released this Pikachu Bear Brick, right?
Pikachu was my nickname when I was in high school.
That's a good one.
I do want to ask you something. The sport seems really obvious in as much as that
Yeah.
we just sold the first Madden, one of the
Right.
early Maddens, out of John Madden's office. And I assume and we're about to have a sports auction as well. So I assume that is kind of a really good and interesting place because sports has obviously been a significant domain for video games for a very long time. So there's that. Christian wants to know, how do I get a job in this field?
Apply at ha.com on our career page. We have our listings posted there. So, if you're interested, definitely drop that resume and send a cover letter.
I want to get to a couple of things. We're going to wrap this up in a couple of minutes. So if you have a question, feel free to get it in. We've been here for an hour. I know it feels like 5 minutes because although when you get around me, it can feel like 5 hours. So, we often get asked a lot, and I know this happens a lot in your category as well, the withdrawal of a game, and people, I assume, ask you, why do games get withdrawn? Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I certainly, if we're talking about transparency, we're talking about the indices, we're talking about pop reports and censuses and so forth. Talk a little bit about how games get pulled from auctions.
Sure. So, I can totally understand why people would have questions about that. But, I guess the easiest answer I can give is probably just, we pull them at our own discretion. So as an example, like earlier this week, we pulled a WATA 96A+, I believe, copy of Mega Man 3. So in that particular example's case, it was promised to a signature auction venue and it was scheduled to a weekly by mistake. So just to kind of illustrate the process, for people who aren't aware, when a game comes to us, it's the process that it goes through. It travels through about 20 different sets of hands from start to finish, and so there are a lot of chances for miscommunication to occur along that operational chain, and so sometimes. The sad fact is we don't catch it until it's kind of down to the wire. And, unfortunately, it does happen from time to time. But
seldom, but it does.
But I like to think that at least we don't see it too often.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, Heritage sold last year, close to 10,000 video games. Yeah. I think it was 8,000, something like that. And, there's a withdrawal or a mistake that happens and we have to withdraw it in 1% of the time, less than 1%.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's just a reality of the world that these sorts of mistakes happen. It happens in my category all the time. We get questions, why was this withdrawn? I really wanted to bid on it. The answer is it's going to just be in like the next signature auction, or it was miscatalogued, and so we're going to offer it when we cataloged it correctly, something like that. The truth is, unfortunately, much more boring than some of the stories that I've seen on Facebook.
Yeah.
Well, I do want to ask you, I want to wrap this up here. We have, like I said, been here for an hour. We have a million things to get through. But I do want to talk about, you mentioned a moment ago that for WATA, there's only the NES pop report. Yeah. Why is it just that for the moment?
That's a question for WATA. I don't know. I mean, there's no ETA on the rest of the population report, as far as I'm aware. Does
that make your life harder? I assume it does.
Yes.
Yeah.
It does.
Yeah, we want the pop report as much as anyone, if not more so.
I've probably been begging for it since the very beginning.
Yeah.
Like I've stopped begging as often because I know it drives them crazy, but I still quietly beg them from time to time. Can you please release it?
Yeah, I mean, it goes back to what we were saying earlier, where the more information that's available, the more confident that people can make with their bidding decisions, the more confidence they can have.
Right.
They've been saying it's coming for quite a while. We got the first WATA pop report for the NES at the end of November last year. I think VGA said they'd release their pop report at the end of last year, and we haven't seen it yet. I mean, as soon as it's out there, we're going to be all over it and including it in the descriptions. Right. As it is now, we mention the NES Pop Report in the descriptions on every lot where it's relevant.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, yeah, no ETA on anything else.
And I want to make sure you're correct. There's a week left for consignments for the next signature.
So not quite that long, because the deadline's March 2nd. So if you're interested in consigning, hit us up.
Yeah, you need it in-house
sooner
by
rather
next
than
Wednesday.
later.
All right. Well, again, if folks want to get a hold of you, videogames@ha.com
That's
sounds
the
like
best
probably the best and fastest way. I appreciate you all doing it. I appreciate everybody for their questions and for watching, whether it's live or whether it's on video. There you go. The next deadline again signs March 2nd. ValarieM@ha.com. We're going to do another one of these again, probably sooner than we did this one. It's been about a year. It's we'll do one in a few months. Until then, I appreciate you watching and I appreciate you being here. Thanks, y'all.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robert.
Thanks.